Hey everyone, this is Dave Dubeau here with another episode of the Property Profits Real Estate Podcast. Today, zooming in all the way from the Chicago area, we've got Mr. Sean Morrissey on the call. Sean, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm great, Dave. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So you guys, Sean is a very accomplished real estate entrepreneur. He's been in and around the real estate game since 2003. So that's quite some time. He's done all sorts of things. He's an active real estate investor himself. He's been involved as a realtor. And most importantly, from our standpoint, he's very experienced with managing properties. So he manages his own portfolio. He manages properties for other people. And today we're going to really dial in on some really great tips, tricks, and strategies for self-managing your portfolio. So Sean, can't wait to dive into this.
Yeah, that sounds great. Me too. Excited.
All right, buddy. So let's start with this. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. I'm sure you've learned a lot of hard lessons, and you've seen a lot of other people get into the real estate game and probably get out quite quickly after trying to self-manage their properties, dealing with tenants and toilets. I've still got nightmare memories of that whole experience myself. So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making when they start self-managing? And maybe we can look at what not to do and then compare and contrast that with what is a much better idea.
What to do. Yeah. I mean, honestly, Dave, the first thing that comes to mind is not having a system that's been, tried, tested, and one that's really been used by perhaps, a previous mentor or coach or something of that nature. So when I talk systems with property management, there's really four key components that go into that. And the first is going to be your leasing system. The second of which is going to be your rent collection system. The third is going to be your repair and maintenance system, how you're going to manage those repair calls as they come in. And the fourth is really how you're going to inspect those properties to make sure that the tenant's adhering to the lease and that the home's taking care of your tenant, your resident. So, folks that just say, hey, I'm excited, and ultimately I'm just going to buy my first rental property, this place cash flows, without a system in place that really support those four key components, we'll eventually come across some kind of nightmare scenario, either with a tenant not paying rent or not having the support system in place when it comes to a repair is really what I would see is most common. And then we'll ultimately, be forced to adjust, I suppose.
So just kind of playing devil's advocate, I mean, four systems, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, leasing, getting paid, getting places repaired, and doing inspections, all very, very important. Now, if somebody's saying, well, you know what, Sean, I've got like one rental property. Do I have to, it sounds pretty complex. Do I have to have four separate systems all set up for that? Can't I just kind of wing it?
Yeah, I suppose that's a good way to play devil's advocate, but rarely do I come across an investor that says, I am going to buy one property and that's going to set me to the pathway of, financial freedom or whatever their goals might be. But if that is the case, then, perhaps you figure it out. But honestly, when I think back when I got started in 2003, and granted, it was a different time back then, 18 years ago, I didn't have all these grandiose plans. I ultimately was like, I'm going to learn as I go to a certain degree. I had, let me take a step back. Back in those days, anybody with a heartbeat could buy a house, right? So at the end of the day, the tenant pool wasn't particularly strong. And I eventually came across a scenario back in, I believe it was 2005, where I had to settle up on my first eviction. And I understood the basics, right? But I didn't have my people in place to assist me. And quite frankly, I didn't quite know if I was adhering to the rules correctly within our particular county. So whether you have one property or whether you've got 10, 20, whatever the case might be, eventually you're going to be challenged. And it's really setting yourself up for those challenges that you want to prepare for. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do here today, is just talk about that in a little depth.
Well, let's talk about each of these systems and maybe a few nuggets, a few tidbits that people can take away from this for you. So number one, leasing. So what would be your number one tip on setting up a leasing system or leasing more effectively?
Yeah, so there's really a few things that come to mind. Number one, you want to have a system in place to take great photos, right? Because photos are the name of the game. And we could talk video in that respect too, but given where we're at in the marketplace, especially here in the Chicagoland area, quality photos go a long way.
Okay.
Number two,
First, let's back up for a second.
sure.
Okay, setting up a system for great photos, that sounds great, but sorry, are you telling me that it ain't gonna cut it if I go into the house with my iPhone and snap a few pics? What are you suggesting that people do instead?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, having some kind of, let me put it this way, having, a tripod or some kind of phone stabilizer in your case, Dave, so that you're making sure you've got nice level shots, making sure your lighting is adequate goes a long way. And going as far as photo editing software. I'm not necessarily saying you go out there and pay $150 every time you have a vacancy to have photos recreated for you by paying a photographer per se. But making sure that you've got the lighting, the stabilization factor, and the quality of photo that's going to carry down the road.
So any tips on taking effective photos? I mean, besides the tripod and good lighting, like certain angles, because I see some photos of properties are kind of like this widescreen, weird morph looking thing and all this kind of stuff. Any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a fan of taking shots at an angle, never straight on, particularly when it comes to rooms, to add some depth and dimension to the photo. I'm not a huge fan of the fisheye lens when it comes to creating a deceptive photo, right? So I think we've all looked at photos on, be it realtor.com or Zillow or whatever the case might be, where you say, boy, that backyard's huge, even though it's on a quarter of an acre. And it could be that fisheye lens that does that to you. And what you want to do is you want to set the expectation so that when that person, be it a buyer or a tenant, ends up visiting your property, you're going to exceed their expectations. So what good does it do you if you've got this fisheye lens that creates this massive shot of a backyard, and then they show up, look at the property and say, oh, now I'm disappointed. This isn't nearly as big as I thought. So you always want to set your photos up so that you're going to, enhance the experience. But keep in mind that the majority of people are going to want to visit that property regardless. So you don't ever want to appear deceptive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fair enough. So you're probably taking these photos of the property vacant, unfurnished, if that's what your property is. That's the idea.
Yeah, I think it could be vacant or furnished, in my opinion. It's all going to come down to the quality of the furniture, how that furniture is laid out. If it gives you an idea of how that room can be used in a way that is going to tell that buyer or tenant so that they understand what that room is actually being used for, right? So an office might be a good example of that, or a den, where they, instead of just seeing, 2 to 3 walls and wondering if this is a bedroom or what it might be, actually having some office furniture in there is great. But it's what you've got made available to you in the world of rentals, because quite frankly, given the market we're at right now, you don't need to stage your property for the purposes of turning it for rental. You can go.
But perhaps if in a market where there is higher vacancy, then that might be something to take a look at. What about these things where you can put virtual furniture in the photograph? What are your thoughts on stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've experimented with that stuff. I feel like it always, to me, makes it look like the furniture is somehow floating in the air. So I don't know if it's a perfect art yet. I could certainly see where that could be a more attractive tool as time goes by, but I haven't quite figured out a system that I've loved when it comes to virtual staging.
All right, very good. So really good photographs. Thanks for the tips there. What next when it comes to leasing?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, you want to make sure you're priced right? So having access to your local multiple listing service, having access to a realtor that'll share rental comparables with you certainly goes a long way. And then you're going to want to have your price reflect what you're comfortable with, and not only generating your appropriate cash flow, but what the market's going to call for, right? So pricing it right is number 2. Number 3, in my opinion, is your application process, right? So there's so many different websites out there now where you can have somebody apply online, supply their last month of pay stubs, and then you get the credit, criminal, and eviction background check process for a certain price. Make sure you find a site that you love and one that is easy for the tenant to understand. And so that ultimately they don't have to send everything in piecemeal format, where now you've got to match up the name of Joe Smith's pay stubs with the application they completed 2 weeks ago with the credit report they just supplied themselves. So having an application process is going to be huge. And then naturally having a lease template that you can fall back on that you're in love with. And that could be as easy as, again, contacting your local realtor per se, and using something that the realtor board is comfortable with, or it could be something that you have drafted by an attorney local to your area that has a lot of experiences with what's going on in your area when it comes to potential tenant issues. So, two of my favorite clauses personally are when it comes to pets, illegal pets, basically pets that the homeowner does not, the landlord does not permit, having a penalty involved there. And when it comes to additional occupants, and then having some clarification regarding security deposit, what it involves, what it can be kept for, what it can't be kept for, because those are all things that in my marketplace, folks may try to take advantage of, and you want to be sure that you've got your butt covered.
That's a fascinating idea. Hold that thought for a second. Hi there, this is Dave Dubeau, and real estate investors hire me to raise capital the right way. Why? Because most of them are stuck with too small of a portfolio, and they don't know how to attract investors and raise money for their deals. So I help them to connect, capture, and close their ideal money partners. Bottom line, when you've got a deal, you're going to have the capital to do it. So go ahead and book a no-cost capital clarity session with me at bookachatwithdave.com. Again, that's bookachatwithdave.com. Yeah, for sure, Sean. So when it comes to those application sites, I'm sure there's tons of them out there. Is there one that's like pretty non-techy friendly for those folks that are watching this going, hey, that sounds great, but I don't want to have to spend a long time figuring this stuff out? Anywhere you'd point them?
I mean, I'll just give folks the one that I love to use, the website that I use. It's rentapplication.net. And through that website, you could basically set up your own application template, and you're given your own application domain so that you can direct folks just strictly to that domain. And then, it tends to cost $40. So it's a little on the pricier side with that particular website. But in my opinion, given the layout and the promptness in which you get information back, it tends to be a good one. And here
$40 per application or per month, or how does
$40 per adult applicant. Okay. And you could charge more than that if you want to. I don't use our application as a profit center, but you certainly could do that. And the other great thing about that website I should mention is, depending on what market you live in. So here in Chicago proper, you are now not allowed to run a criminal background check until you've reviewed the rental application, the credit report, and the pay stubs. And then you can process the criminal background check in Cook County specifically. And that particular website is designed for that purpose. So if you're in a market where that's on the horizon, so that we're not discriminating against folks that have felonies, you may want to consider that website as an option, or look for a website that ultimately is going to provide that option, so that you're basically, what you're doing is you're providing the address of the property before a criminal background check is provided. And then rent application takes it from there. So
awesome. All right. Very good. So we've kind of covered some big broad strokes when it comes to leasing. We aren't going to have time to go over all four of the categories, but maybe we can take a little look into the next one, which the next system, which you're talking about, which is getting paid.
Yeah, rent collection, right? I mean, your lease is going to set up the parameters of when rent is due, what's considered your late fee. But you've got to notify your resident how you're going to permit payment. And
what do you recommend these days? What do you find works best for you, Sean?
So what I like using, I've used Buildium as a property management software for some years. And the reason for that is I do some third-party property management as well as manage my own portfolio. But this day and age, again, there's all sorts of tools so that you can collect rent from tenants online. So let's take one that, probably your listeners are familiar with, and that's, Cozy. You can typically have tenants pay rent to you as landlord through Cozy at no cost, so long as they put in their account number, the routing number of their checking account. But typically a lot of these websites will also allow your resident to pay by credit or debit card, but there's typically a fee associated to that. So it might be, 2.95%. Now that fee typically doesn't go to you as the landlord, but it goes to the software company. So that's always a little bit frustrating, but I have always found those websites to be the one that most folks prefer. Now, other forms of payment that you can look into are, Zelle is used all over the place now. It's not just with the big boy banks, but with all sorts of banks. You could look at Zelle as a potential option. You could look at Venmo as a potential option. You can stick with the old school ways of, mail me a check or deposit it into the rent collection account that you've designated for your tenant. But ultimately, what I like to do is provide a few methods so that the resident is always choosing the method that they're most comfortable with. So, this day and age, 80-90% of the folks that rent from us prefer to just use the website with no processing fee. But there's still that 10% out there that say, hey, listen, I prefer to either mail a check or drop it in a rent drop box or drop by the local bank and deposit it directly into that account because they're just unfamiliar with technology. And that's fine too, but you always want to give the technological route and you want to give kind of the basic route, the old school route, I suppose. And as long as you can do that, you're going to capture the majority of your audience with the idea that when rent is not paid by the 5th, you're not going to get any lame excuse like the check is stuck in the mail. And frankly speaking, we don't accept checks to be mailed anymore because we live in an age where that's no longer an excuse that the check is stuck in the mail. And if it is, then you got to change your system.
Right. Yeah.
So that's critical. The other part I'll bring up when it comes to rent collection is just making sure you understand the eviction process in your particular state, especially right now, right? In the weird, crazy world of the eviction moratoriums and what we've gone through as landlords the last 18, soon to be 24 months, right? Understanding what you can or can't do, and then having a few attorneys that you have working relationships with. So when you do have that challenge, you do have that eviction, either for non-payment of rent or a lease violation, that you can refer to them, make sure you get your notices served properly and move through the court system efficiently. Because the last thing you want to do is show up in court and find out that a judge doesn't think that your case is valid based on, in my opinion, based on how you serve the tenant most of the time. So you want to make sure you've got a few attorneys on speed dial that have working relationships with the judge that handles evictions in your county, and then just make sure you've got your rent collection process in place. And if you could do those two things, the majority of your issues when it comes to rent collection will be tackled. Have
you had much in the way of challenges with rent collection over the course of the pandemic?
We've had 3 tenants. And ironically enough, Dave, if you were to Google CBS News Chicago back in April, I did a little piece with CBS Chicago here on a tenant that hadn't paid rent at that point. I think it was like 8 months. Now we're pushing 12 months. And it's been a wild ride. Fortunately, we were able to get some of that federal money that was issued through the state. Took a little longer than expected. But really, I've only had 3 tenants. And out of those 3, I'm really left with 1 that unfortunately has continued to be a bit of a burden. And it's been, in my opinion, taken advantage of.
Out of a total of how many tenants that you're dealing with?
Roughly about 100 right now. Okay. So, let's just call
that's not
1%.
bad.
Yeah. So
97% success during a pandemic. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of folks have had similar experiences. And that's speaking to the fact that, the majority of people out there are indeed honest and want to do good by their fellow man. But you're always going to have the one stinker, and you're going to have to, it's just going to come with the territory this day and age.
No, that's why they pay us the big bucks, right?
No, something like that.
Awesome, Sean. Well, time flies when we're having fun. We only got through 2 out of the 4 processes. I think you've got you do. You've got an ebook called Building Your Efficient Property Management System. So if people want to find out more about Sean Morrissey and maybe grab a copy of that book, what should they do?
Yeah, you can check out our website. It's www.chicago-realty-group.com. And you can just follow the links to the ebook. We also have it set up as an audiobook through listenable.co. And hopefully, this could be of assistance to your listeners. But if you have any further questions, you can always reach out to me through the website. I'd be happy to help.
Yeah. Plus, you got a podcast too.
That's right. Yeah. Landlording for Life podcast for those folks looking to scale and really become self-management type of landlords. It tends to be focused towards those folks, but we cover a wide array of topics. And I think we're in, roughly 115, 120 podcast episodes at this point. So plugging right along.
Fantastic. Sean, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Have a great day.
All right, everybody, take care, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye. Well, hey there. Thanks for tuning into the Property Profits podcast. If you like this episode, that's great. Please go ahead and subscribe on iTunes. Give us a good review. That'd be awesome. I appreciate that. And if you're looking to attract investors and raise capital for your deals, then I'm going to invite you to get a complimentary copy of my newest book, right back there. There it is. The Money Partner Formula. You can get a PDF version at investorattractionbook.com. Again, investorattractionbook.com. Take care.